Japan has a public face. The trains, the toilets, the vending machines, the politeness. The things the world knows about and talks about and makes YouTube videos about. Then there is the other layer. The systems running quietly underneath the visible one. The agreements nobody wrote down. The industries with no signage. The traditions practiced by people who never mention them because mentioning them would defeat the purpose entirely. Here are Japanese ideas so secret that even most Japanese don't know about them. The coded language of Japanese convenience. Store uniforms. Every major Japanese convenience store chain operates an internal uniform color hierarchy that customers walk past daily without reading. At a standard 7-Eleven in Japan, the color of a staff member's uniform indicates their authorization level. Who can override a register? Who can authorize a return? Who has keys to the back inventory system, without any visible badge or title? A customer who knows the system can identify the most senior person on shift in 3 seconds by looking at collar color. A customer who doesn't, which is almost everyone, sees only staff. The system exists because Japanese service culture considers visible hierarchy displays disruptive to the customer experience. The hierarchy is real and fully operational. It is simply encoded in a way that requires knowledge to read. The store is organized. The organization is invisible. Most staff know their own level. Very few know the complete key. Pachinko parlors. As an open secret cash economy, pachinko is Japan's most popular form of gambling, generating more revenue annually than Las Vegas and Macau combined. It is also technically illegal to gamble for cash in Japan. The industry resolved this through a system so widely understood it barely qualifies as a secret, yet so carefully maintained, it has never been legally dismantled. Players win steel balls. Steel balls cannot be exchanged for cash inside the parlor, because that would be gambling. Players take their balls to a small independent kiosk located outside and around the corner, technically a separate, unaffiliated business, which purchases them for cash. The kiosk is owned by the same operator as the parlor. Everyone in Japan knows this. The legal system has known it for decades. The arrangement persists because dismantling it would eliminate an industry employing hundreds of thousands of people and generating trillions of yen in tax revenue. The secret is not what is happening. The secret is the shared agreement to maintain the legal fiction that it isn't. The real reason. Japanese trains play departure melodies. Every Japanese train station plays a unique departure melody as trains leave. Officially, it signals closing doors and improves safety. Unofficially, it shapes behavior. Composer Minoru Murata designed these melodies to create calm, reduce rushing, and subtly alert passengers to station changes. Each tune is short, distinct, and emotionally tuned to prevent panic or last-second movement. Passengers feel guided without realizing why. Japan framed the system as aesthetic, but its purpose is deeper. It manages mood and movement at scale. For decades, millions have responded to these cues, experiencing them as simple sound, not the behavioral design behind them. Shrines that deliberately give wrong directions. Several hundred Shinto shrines across Japan maintain an old navigational tradition called Michi-ma-doi, way confusion, in which the path from the torii gate to the main hall is deliberately non-linear. The route curves, doubles back, or passes the same landmark twice from different angles. The tradition's documented origin is defensive. A confusing path slowed hostile approaches to the shrine's inner sanctum. But the sustained reason is spiritual. Shinto theology holds that the transition from ordinary space to sacred space requires a period of disorientation that interrupts habitual thinking. The confusion is the preparation. A visitor who arrives at the main hall slightly uncertain of exactly how they got there is in a better state of open attention than one who walked a straight, efficient path. Most visitors experience the winding route as poor planning. The poor planning is the plan. Almost no informational material at the shrines explains this. The disorientation works precisely because its purpose is undisclosed. The underground library network beneath Tokyo. Beneath campuses like Waseda University and University of Tokyo lie vast underground book storage networks holding millions of uncatalogued volumes. Built post-war when space was limited, these collections grew faster than they were indexed. They aren't secret, just largely unknown. Access exists for those aware of them, but most researchers never are. Librarians call it the maze. Entire academic careers pass above these archives without realizing what sits below, physically present yet effectively invisible to the systems that define discoverable knowledge. The social function of Japanese drinking culture, nobody admits. Japan distinguishes between public behavior, tatemae, and private feelings, hon. Less visible is how this gap is managed. The nomikai, after-work drinking gathering, functions as a controlled release valve. Officially framed as team bonding, it informally allows people to speak more openly. Comments made during these gatherings are understood as sincere, but not formally binding. Criticism and concern surface without immediate consequences in workplace hierarchy. Senior staff listen for insights unavailable in formal settings. Junior staff gain space to express honesty. Nothing is recorded, yet everything is understood. The system isn't explained directly, but most learn its rules early in their working life. The feudal mapping tradition that still shapes Tokyo's streets. Tokyo's street layout is famously disorienting to foreign visitors. A dense web of unnamed lanes, irregular blocks, and addresses assigned by the order in which buildings were constructed rather than their position on the street. No two adjacent buildings necessarily have sequential numbers. Navigation by address alone is largely impossible. This is not a historical accident that modernization failed to correct. It is a deliberate cartographic inheritance from the Edo period, when feudal lords known as daimyo maintained their estates in the city under a spatial arrangement designed by the Tokugawa shogunate to prevent coordinated military movement. Wide avenues were avoided. Neighborhoods were designed to disorient anyone without local knowledge. The city was a tactical maze, and the maze was the security system. Modern Tokyo inherited these streets not because nobody noticed they were confusing, but because the political and property structures built on top of them over 4 centuries made systematic reorganization impractical. The confusion that frustrates every first-time visitor is the ghost of a 400-year-old military strategy still functioning below the surface of a modern city. The kimono industry's internal grading system. Japan's kimono market, worth billions of yen annually, sustained largely by the tea ceremony, wedding, and formal occasion industries, operates on a quality grading system entirely invisible to buyers who have not been initiated into it. A kimono displayed in a high-end department store carries no visible price justification beyond materials and brand. Internally, the trade operates on a classification of weaving technique, dyeing method, and artisan certification that runs to over 40 distinct categories, each with established trade values that determine wholesale pricing. A buyer outside the system pays the retail price. A buyer inside the system, connected to the artisan networks in Kyoto's Nishijin weaving district, purchases at a price that reflects actual craft rarity rather than retail positioning. The system is maintained through apprenticeship networks in which knowledge of the grading criteria is transmitted personally, never published, and never fully disclosed to the retail customer. The kimono you see in the department store and the kimono the tea ceremony master owns may appear similar. They are not in the same category. Only one person in the transaction knows the difference. The silent signaling system. In Japanese restaurants, high-end Japanese restaurants, particularly kaiseki establishments, operate a service communication system invisible to diners. Staff communicate the pace of the meal, the readiness of the kitchen, and the attentiveness required at specific tables through a set of object positions and small physical signals in the dining room itself. The placement of specific items on a service tray, the angle of a folded cloth on a side station, whether a certain screen is fully closed or fractionally open. These are not standardized across restaurants. Each establishment develops its own signal set during staff training, but the principle is universal. In a dining environment where verbal communication between staff would disrupt the atmosphere, the room itself carries the messages. A guest at a table where the service is exceptionally responsive and seemingly anticipatory is sitting inside a communication network they cannot read. The attentiveness is not intuition. It is a coded conversation happening continuously around them, conducted in the position of objects, and they are the subject being discussed. The hidden floors in Tokyo's department stores. Major Tokyo department stores like Takashimaya, Isetan, and Mitsukoshi include floors not shown on public directories. These spaces host private lounges, exclusive food halls, and personal shopping services for select clients. Access isn't advertised. It's granted through staff relationships based on trust and spending history. Customers learn about these floors only when deemed appropriate. They aren't hidden in a forbidden sense. They're simply undisclosed. In Japan, access to certain experiences often depends less on asking and more on the relationships that quietly make the information available. The earthquake. Early warning system. Most people never feel. Japan's earthquake early warning system, issued through television, radio, and mobile phones, is known to the public. What is less known is the secondary infrastructure layer beneath it, a network of seismic sensors embedded in the foundations of major buildings, bridges, and transit infrastructure that communicates directly with building management systems, triggering automatic responses, elevator stops, gas shutoffs, door unlocking, before the public alert is even issued. A person in a modern Tokyo office tower during a significant seismic event will notice that the elevator stopped, the automatic doors opened, and the gas stove in the office kitchen clicked off. They will notice this before they feel the earthquake. They will likely attribute it to the building's response to the shaking. The building responded before the shaking arrived. The sensor network received the P wave, the fast, less destructive initial seismic wave, and the building acted on it, while the S wave, which causes actual damage, was still seconds away. Most people who have experienced this do not know what they experienced. The building protected them in advance. The mechanism that did it operates below the level of public explanation. The tatami room that changes size for formality. Traditional Japanese rooms are measured in tatami mats, a unit of area standardized at approximately 1.8 by 0.9 meters. What this measurement system encodes, invisibly to outsiders, is a complete grammar of social formality based on spatial ratios. An 8-mat room is a standard reception room. A 10-mat room with a tokonoma alcove is a formal guest room. A 4.5-mat room is the historical standard for a tea ceremony, the specific size calculated by Sen no Rikyu in the 16th century to create an equality of proximity between host and guest that eliminated hierarchical distance. The smallness was the philosophy made physical. In a 4.5-mat room, no one can sit far enough away from anyone else to feel superior. Every traditional Japanese room broadcasts its social function through its dimensions to anyone who can read the count. The room is a sentence. Most people living in rooms built on this system no longer know the grammar. The sentence is still being spoken. The network of retired salarymen who run everything. Japan's corporate world is visibly run by its current executives. Japan's actual institutional decisions are substantially influenced by a network of retired senior executives known as OB, old boys, who maintain informal advisory relationships with their former companies, their industry associations, and in some cases, government ministries. The OB network operates through a system called Amakudari, descent from heaven, in which senior officials from government ministries retire into advisory or board positions at the industries they previously regulated. The practice is officially restricted and frequently criticized in Japanese media. It continues comprehensively because the relationships it formalizes are merely the visible portion of connections that began decades earlier and exist independently of any formal position. The person with the institutional memory, the relationships that predate the current political cycle, and the authority that comes from having been trusted for 40 years does not appear in an org chart. They appear at dinner, at golf, and at the kind of meeting that has no minutes because the agreement was reached before anyone sat down. The design language of Japanese wrapping paper, furoshiki, Japanese wrapping cloth, operates a visual communication system in which the knot style, cloth pattern, and color combination used to wrap a gift communicates the nature of the relationship between giver and recipient, the formality of the occasion, and in traditional usage, the approximate value range of the contents. A diagonal fold with a specific knot style indicates a condolence gift. A different knot indicates a celebratory gift. The specific pattern of the cloth, crane motifs for longevity, pine for endurance, particular combinations of red and white or black and white, layers additional meaning that a recipient trained in the system reads before opening the package. The reading is not universal among contemporary Japanese. The full literacy has declined with each generation. But in contexts where it is still practiced, formal tea ceremony culture, traditional business gift-giving, certain family ceremonies, the wrapping is not decoration. It is the first communication of the gift, delivered before the contents are revealed in a language that has been operating quietly for several centuries. The Roji. Garden paths engineered to erase your personality. The Roji is the garden path leading to a traditional Japanese tea house. It looks like a carefully placed series of stepping stones through moss and foliage. It is a psychological decompression chamber engineered by Sen-no Rikyu to systematically dismantle the visitor's social identity before they enter the tea space. The stones are placed at a spacing that requires attention to each step, too irregular to walk while thinking about something else. The path passes a stone water basin where hands are washed. Not for hygiene, but for the psychological effect of cold water and the posture of bending, which physically interrupts the habitual carriage of a person in social performance mode. The path is deliberately low-lit and enclosed. By the time a visitor reaches the tea house entrance, a small crawl-through door called a nijiriguchi, so low that everyone must bow to enter. The social hierarchy they arrived with has been physically interrupted several times. The engineer of this path did not describe it as psychological design. He described it as aesthetic. The effect is the same. Every element of the approach was calculated to arrive at the tea house a different person than the one who entered the garden gate. The sound environment of Japanese retail is not accidental. In high-end Japanese retail, the environment is carefully engineered beyond what shoppers notice. Temperature, scent, and sound are calibrated using insights from environmental psychology. Ambient audio is tuned to reduce frequencies linked to anxiety, subtly lowering stress. Scent systems influence time perception, making visits feel shorter than they are. None of this is disclosed. Most people credit the pleasant experience to products or service. Those matter, but the atmosphere itself is doing quiet work. Japan didn't just design stores visually. It shaped how they feel at a neurological level, turning environment into an invisible layer of the retail experience that influences behavior without calling attention to itself. The paper that tells you what to feel at a funeral. Japanese funeral services often include printed programs that go beyond schedules. They quietly guide the emotional flow of the ceremony, indicating moments for private grief, composed farewell, and gradual acceptance. It functions almost like choreography, helping attendees move through loss without needing to decide what to feel or when. Funeral directors view this as care, not control. In moments of intense grief, structure reduces uncertainty and emotional burden. Outside Japan, it might feel intrusive. Inside Japan, it is experienced as support. The practice is rarely discussed, yet for many who encounter it, it becomes an unseen framework that gently carries them through the ceremony. The competitive silence beneath Japanese negotiation. Japanese negotiation often uses silence, but behind it is structured training. Some corporations teach Chinmoku Kunren, or silence training, where participants practice maintaining eye contact without speaking for extended periods. Sessions begin with short intervals and build to minutes of deliberate quiet. The goal isn't manipulation, it's control. Many negotiators feel pressure to fill silence, often revealing information or making concessions. This training removes that reflex. A negotiator comfortable with prolonged silence holds a clear advantage over one who breaks it quickly. This skill isn't visible, but it shapes outcomes. Japan developed it intentionally and kept it subtle, because its effectiveness depends on the other side not expecting it. The hidden architecture of Japanese apology. Japan's apology culture is more structured than it appears. The language includes multiple levels of apology, each matched to severity, relationship, and context. Using the wrong level can create a second offense. A common mistake is using sumimasen when mushiwake gozaimasen is required. The first signals minor inconvenience. The second acknowledges serious responsibility. They are not interchangeable. This hierarchy isn't fully taught in standard education. It's learned in specific environments like hospitality or corporate training. Even many native speakers navigate it intuitively rather than formally. In Japan, apology is not just expression, it is precision, where wording reflects both accountability and respect. The municipal office that keeps two sets of records. In some rural parts of Japan, municipalities quietly maintain two population counts: the official registry and an internal estimate of actual residents. The gap exists because the Juminyo system requires people to deregister when they move, which doesn't always happen. Names remain on records long after individuals leave. Official figures determine government funding, so they remain unchanged. Internally, local administrators track real population levels, often significantly lower, to manage services effectively. There's no formal acknowledgement of the difference. One number reflects administrative reality. The other reflects lived reality. Both exist simultaneously because the system depends on each in different ways. The flavor that only exists in Japan. Because of a regulatory accident. CALPIS exists as it does because of a 1919 regulatory quirk. Classified as a health tonic, it avoided sugar taxes that applied to soft drinks. This shaped its formulation, giving it a mild, fermented, lightly sweet taste, closer to something therapeutic than indulgent. Created by Kayun Mishima after encountering fermented milk in Inner Mongolia, the drink evolved within that constraint. The regulation disappeared decades ago, but the flavor remained. Today, CALPIS is globally exported, its unique profile rooted in a rule no longer remembered, yet still tasted. The map that doesn't show what's there. In Kyoto, some traditional ochaya operate without signs, listings, or public access. These tea houses accept guests only through personal introduction from trusted clients. The absence of visibility is intentional. It prevents casual entry and ensures every guest arrives through a chain of accountability. Each introduction carries responsibility. The person inviting you vouches for your behavior, placing their own standing at risk. Over time, this creates an environment where every visitor has been quietly vetted. The experience isn't sold openly. It exists within relationships built over years, sometimes generations. Entry isn't requested. It's granted from within, based on trust rather than transaction. The psychological contract of the Japanese neighborhood. In Japan's older neighborhoods, the chonaikai appears to be a voluntary association for events and local coordination. In practice, it functions as a deeply embedded layer of social governance. Residents collectively hold informal knowledge about households, who lives there, who may need help, and who contributes to the community. Participation builds trust. Helping with local tasks or events creates a kind of social currency that matters during disputes or emergencies. Non-participation brings no explicit penalty. Instead, it results in something subtler, the absence of support when it's needed. The system isn't enforced. It simply operates through relationships, quietly shaping how communities function day to day. the agreement at the bottom of Japanese society that holds everything up. Japan's social order is often explained by culture or policy, but its core is simpler and harder to formalize. An unspoken agreement exists at the individual level. Shared spaces are everyone's responsibility, not enforced by law, not directed by institutions, but carried quietly by individuals. A commuter picking up litter, a driver avoiding unnecessary noise, a shopkeeper cleaning beyond their boundary. None of these acts seek recognition. They reflect a deeply internalized standard. There is no document, no penalty, no system behind it. It's passed through observation across generations. Infrastructure matters, but behavior sustains it. Japan functions because millions of people treat shared space as if it belongs to them. The Kaiden Dansu. There's a piece of furniture in traditional Japanese homes that I had to look at twice before I understood what I was seeing. From the front, it looks like a wide chest of drawers, different sized compartments, some with sliding panels, some with pull handles, arranged in an asymmetric stack. Then you look at the side, and it's a staircase. The Kaidan Dansu is a staircase built from individual storage units. Each step is a drawer, or a cabinet door, or a lift-top compartment. You walk up it in the morning. During the day, it holds whatever the household needs: futon storage in the deeper lower sections, documents and small objects in the shallower ones near the top. Two problems: one object, neither function compromised to accommodate the other. The joinery on these is serious. Sliding compartments that still move smoothly after a century of daily use. Wood chosen specifically for stability across decades of humidity cycling. Step heights that remain ergonomically comfortable both for climbing and for the furniture proportions. Nobody made the drawers rough because it was also a staircase. Japan solved a space problem and then refined the solution until it was also beautiful, because apparently those were never separate considerations. Sudare. I didn't expect to spend as long as I did thinking about a bamboo blind. The sudare is a screen made from thinly split bamboo or reeds, woven with cotton or silk, hung across windows in summer. Before mechanical climate control existed, it was one of the primary tools Japanese homes use to manage heat, and modern building science has since confirmed it works roughly as well as its users always understood it did. The physics is simple. Direct sunlight carries a heat load that gets absorbed by whatever surface it hits: walls, floors, you, and then radiates back into the room. The sudare intercepts sunlight before it enters, reflects a portion of it back outside, and lets air through unimpeded. A room fitted with sudare across its south and west openings sits measurably cooler than the same room shaded only by roof overhangs. No electricity, no mechanical parts. The light quality through sudare is the thing I find hardest to communicate. Soft, slightly moving, warm green on humid afternoons, changing as the screen shifts in the breeze. I've seen modern blinds that block more light and more heat than sudare does, and produce an interior that feels like the outside world has been switched off. The sudare manages the heat and keeps the room connected to the afternoon happening around it. That's actually a harder balance to strike than it sounds, and Japan figured it out before the concept of passive climate control existed as a phrase. Morishio. At the entrance of many traditional Japanese homes, and in virtually every ryokan, you'll find a small, neat mound of white salt on a ceramic dish. Sometimes two, one on each side of the doorway. Morishio. Piled salt. The standard explanation is Shinto purification, a gesture that wards off negative energy and invites good fortune. That's genuinely held, not decorative. But it's only part of what's happening. Salt has documented pest deterrent properties. Slugs, certain insects, and vermin avoid contact with it. In a traditional household, salt placed at the threshold was simultaneously a spiritual practice and functional pest management, the two purposes running together long enough that separating them became unnecessary. They were both just true at once. The Morishio wasn't performing superstition while ignoring practicality. In the context it came from, those weren't different categories. Then there's the third function, which is the one I keep returning to. The condition of the salt, whether it's clumping with absorbed moisture or sitting dry and crisp, gives an attentive homeowner a quiet, daily data point about the air quality at their threshold, a passive humidity indicator that requires no checking, no equipment, and no thought. Just a glance at something already there. Japan built a 3-function object from a pile of salt and a small dish, and placed it where everyone entering the house would see it every single day. Tatami. Most people who know about tatami know it as flooring.
Tatami comes from the Japanese word tatamu, which means to fold. This refers to folded woven mats that were used to sleep and sit on.
The woven rush grass mats, the texture, the smell, the specific color that fades from green gold to pale straw with age. What's much less understood outside Japan is that tatami is also a climate system. The dried rush grass contains air pockets and moisture-binding compounds that interact continuously with the surrounding air. When humidity is high, tatami absorbs moisture from the room. When conditions dry out, it releases what it stored. A bidirectional humidity buffer, no moving parts, no power source, and a functional lifespan of decades when properly maintained. The smell of tatami, that green, dusty, distinctly Japanese scent, is the smell of this process working. Organic material in active relationship with the air around it. Tatami gets replaced every 4 to 6 years. Not because it looks worn, but because the rush grass exhausts its moisture cycling capacity. The maintenance schedule is built around the functional life of the climate control property, not the cosmetic life of the surface. Japan put a humidity management system on the floor, called it flooring, and maintained it on a schedule that only makes sense when you understand what the floor is actually doing. The irori. The irori is a square hearth cut directly into the floor, a recessed opening filled with ash and a controlled fire, with a hook suspended above it on an adjustable ratchet mechanism. The mechanism hangs from a ceiling beam on a carved wooden counterweight. Slide it and the hanging pot rises or falls above the fire, controlling cooking temperature without touching anything hot. Functional mechanical engineering built from wood and iron, no written specification, and in documented examples, it's been operating for several centuries. But the engineering isn't the part I find most interesting. The irori heats the room, cooks the food, provides the social center of the household, all expected. What's less visible is what the fire does to the building itself. The convection currents it generates circulate air continuously through the structure, keeping ceiling timbers dry, preventing moisture from settling in joints and rafters. Houses built around an active irori show significantly less structural decay than comparable buildings where the hearth was removed. The fire was the building's respiratory system. Someone understood that connection well enough to design the entire house around maintaining it. Kiri wood. This one takes a moment to fully sit with. The kiri tansu is a storage chest made from paulownia wood, light, pale timber that Japanese households used for their most important storage for centuries. Paulownia repels moths, regulates internal humidity, and is light enough to move quickly in an emergency. Those are all real properties and all genuine reasons to choose it. But here's the one that stays with me. Paulownia absorbs moisture and expands significantly when wet. In the presence of water, the water used to fight a house fire, a kiri tansu sealed by that expansion becomes functionally airtight. The contents are protected from fire and smoke damage even while the surrounding building burns. Nobody deliberately engineered this in. Japanese craftspeople observed the wood's behavior over generations and then selected specifically for it, because a chest that could protect the family's most important documents and textiles through a house fire was worth the premium cost. Fire was an existential risk in traditional Japanese cities, buildings densely packed, built in wood and paper. The kiri tansu was the household's primary response to that risk at the scale of a single object. The chest that survives the fire also keeps moths from the silk and manages moisture around the documents. Japan built disaster insurance into a piece of furniture and sold it as storage. Hickite. Count the hardware on the doors in the room you're in right now. Knobs, hinges, strike plates, latch mechanisms, maybe a lock, handles on both sides. Each piece is a visual interruption and eventually a maintenance problem waiting to develop. The Hikite eliminates the category. It's a recessed finger pull built into the face of Japanese sliding doors, a small depression typically covered with a decorative paper or fabric insert sized for 2 or 3 fingers, positioned so the panel moves without any grip strength and without anything protruding from the surface. There are no knobs in a traditional Japanese home, no handles, no latches requiring mechanical engagement before something will open. The finger finds a depression in the surface. The panel slides. The wall remains a wall. I noticed this on my 3rd visit to a traditional home, which tells you how unobtrusive it is. It took me that long to identify what was absent. The doors work perfectly. They're just quiet about it. Once you've lived with Hikite, the hardware on everything in your own home starts to look like a problem someone stopped thinking about before they finished. Amado. In a traditional Japanese home, the evening has a ritual built into it. As light fades, the household slides the Amado, heavy wooden storm shutters stored folded in a cabinet at the end of each exterior wall, along their tracks until they completely enclose the building behind solid wood. Each shutter clicks into the next through a simple wooden tab and notch system. This takes a few minutes per elevation. The building that spent all day open to the garden, to the breeze, to whatever was happening outside, becomes by the end of it something architecturally different. Sealed, insulated, quiet in a way that glass with curtains isn't, because solid wood absorbs and deflects sound at frequencies that glass transmits right through. The first time I was inside a Japanese home with the Amado closed, it took me a moment to identify what had changed. The room felt heavier and warmer and more settled. It took me longer than it should have to realize it was just genuinely quiet. Japan built 2 different buildings into the same structure. A day building, open to everything around it. A night building, self-contained and sealed. The 20 minutes of closing the Amado is the crossing between them. Deliberate, physical, the same every evening. A transition you do with your hands, rather than just experiencing. Zaisu. The Zaisu is a legless floor chair, a backrest on a small platform base positioned directly on tatami. It looks almost too simple to mention, but it represents something I find genuinely useful to think about. Extended floor sitting produces real back pain. That's documented and not controversial. The Zaisu addresses it without asking anyone to change how they sit, add Western furniture to the room, or change the room's spatial character. The backrest goes to where the person already is. The person stays. Problem solved at the location of the problem. I find this worth noting beyond the description of the object itself, because it's actually an unusual design move. The standard response to a problem like this is to redesign the behavior, sit differently, buy a different chair, change the room. The Zaisu does none of that. It identifies exactly where support is missing and puts support there. Japanese design, at its most characteristic, consistently does this. It meets the person rather than redirecting them somewhere more convenient for the furniture. The Kura. Scattered through traditional Japanese neighborhoods, among the wooden residential buildings, are structures that look architecturally unlike anything surrounding them. Thick-walled, small windows recessed deeply, heavy tiled roofs, white clay-plastered exteriors. These are kura, storehouses built to survive whatever disaster claims the house next door. The walls are 30 to 60 centimeters thick, layered clay plaster over timber frame. The clay's thermal mass and moisture retention resist fire significantly better than any purely wooden structure. The windows are small and fitted with heavy iron-reinforced shutters. The floor is raised above potential flood levels. The roof is tiled at a weight that prevents displacement by fire-generated pressure differentials. Families stored in their kura everything that mattered most: finest textiles, important documents, ceramics, family records. When fire swept through a neighborhood, the family whose kura survived left the disaster with their most important possessions intact. Japan built disaster recovery into the neighborhood at the household level, not as a luxury for wealthy households, as standard residential infrastructure. The kura wasn't an extravagance, it was the backup, the thing designed specifically to be standing when everything else wasn't. The chabudai. The chabudai is a low table, 20 to 35 centimeters tall, with folding legs, designed for floor-level meals in a tatami room. Sets up in 30 seconds, seats a family of 4 to 6, folds flat and stores against a wall in another 30 seconds. The room it occupied has no memory of it. That last part is the whole idea. A permanent dining table in the center of a room makes it a dining room. You can use the space for other things, but you're organizing everything around a fixed object that's always there, reminding you of what the room is supposed to be for. The chabudai makes the meal entirely temporary. When the food is done, the table folds and the room is just a room again, available for whatever comes next without any rearranging, without navigating around anything. The round shape matters more than it looks like it should. A round chabudai seats the same number of people in a closer circle than a rectangular table of equivalent surface area. Everyone equidistant from the center, nobody at the head of anything. The table closes the distance between the people eating around it, and when the meal ends, it gets out of the way without being asked. Furniture that knows its place in the room's order. That's not nothing. Shoin-zukuri. 600 years before anyone wrote a think piece about working from home, Japanese residential architecture had already built the home office into the room. The shoin is a built-in writing alcove, a desk surface projecting from the wall beneath a window, with built-in shelving alongside it, positioned to catch north or east-facing natural light that stays consistent through the day and avoids the glare that shifts with a south or west window. It's been a feature of Japanese homes and temple residences from the 14th century onward. The configuration is specific in ways that took me a moment to fully appreciate. The desk height is calibrated for floor-seated writing. The window placement means the light source doesn't shift dramatically between morning and afternoon. The shelving holds materials within arm's reach without requiring a separate storage piece that takes up floor space. The alcove's position in the room keeps the person working in it visually connected to the surrounding space, while slightly set apart from it, present but not fully absorbed. Every working from home principle that became urgently relevant in 2020, dedicated separation of work from rest, controlled natural light, integrated storage at the point of use, connection to the room without full immersion in it, was resolved in the Shoin 6 centuries earlier. Japan built the home office into the architecture, called it something else entirely, and refined it for several hundred years before anyone else started the conversation. Tana. The tana is a built-in shelving system in the walls of traditional Japanese reception rooms. Shelves at different heights and depths, sometimes staggered, so each one is visible from a slightly different position in the room, creating depth and shadow rather than the flat uniform presentation of a standard shelf. The staggered arrangement didn't come from aesthetics, though it's genuinely beautiful in effect. It comes from a spatial understanding that objects at different heights and depths create a more dynamic visual environment than objects on the same plane, and that a display should draw the eye through a sequence rather than presenting everything simultaneously at equal visual weight. A tana holds 5 objects and makes them feel like they were chosen. A flat shelf holds 5 objects and makes them feel stored. What I didn't initially notice is what the geometry does to the air. The staggered structure creates circulation behind and between displayed objects that flat-backed shelving prevents. In Japan's humidity conditions, objects in sealed contact with walls develop moisture damage over time. The tana's design addresses this passively through its own geometry. The gaps and staggers allow air to move across every surface continuously. The same decision that makes the display beautiful also keeps the objects in good condition. I find it difficult to think of a better single example of form and function arriving at the same answer without any compromise between them. Tokobashira. In the most important room of a traditional Japanese home, the reception room with a display alcove, one of the structural pillars is not milled timber. It's a naturally shaped tree trunk, bark removed, surface polished, but retaining its original taper, its twist, its organic form completely. The Toko Bashira. And its selection is one of the most significant decisions in building a traditional home. The master carpenter chooses it from candidate logs for the quality of its grain, the character of any curve in the trunk, the elegance of its natural taper, its compatibility with everything else in the room. The finest examples can cost more than the rest of the room's materials combined, because the specific natural tree that produces a form this beautiful and structurally appropriate cannot be made, only grown and then found. Every other element of the traditional Japanese reception room is controlled, resolved, refined into stillness. The Toko Bashira is the one place the room releases that control, the thing that was allowed to remain itself inside the most carefully considered space in the house. I've thought about this one more than most of the others. I'm not sure I can fully explain why. Something about a tradition sophisticated enough to know exactly where to stop. Airing the futon. On clear mornings across Japan, futon bedding appears draped over balcony railings, window ledges, and outdoor racks. If you haven't spent time there, it reads as a charming domestic habit, maybe a cultural holdover from before dryers existed. It's actually a maintenance system, and the science behind it is more specific than I expected. A futon aired in direct sunlight for 2 to 4 hours receives UV exposure sufficient to kill the dust mites, bacteria, and fungi that accumulate in sleeping surfaces regardless of how clean the household is, because those organisms live inside the bedding material, where surface cleaning doesn't reach. The heat generated inside the futon during direct sun exposure drives out the moisture that sleepers exhale and perspire through the night. Moisture that, left in place, creates exactly the conditions those organisms need to proliferate. Japanese households maintain this on a regular schedule, not as an occasional deep clean. The results are measurable. Aired filling maintains its loft and thermal properties significantly longer than unaired filling. Dust mite populations in regularly aired bedding are dramatically lower, and the experience of sleeping in a freshly aired futon, warmer, lighter, carrying something faint of outdoor air, is one of those small physical pleasures that once experienced becomes something you notice the absence of and can't quite explain to anyone who hasn't felt it. The weighing scale that moves information to when it's useful. Standard airport check-in produces a consistent and predictable pressure point. You reach the desk, lift your bag onto the scale, discover it is overweight, and manage a public negotiation about fees or frantic repacking while a queue waits directly behind you. The information arrives at the worst moment in the worst location. Japanese airports and hotel lobbies install floor-level scales in pre-check-in areas. The scale sits flush with the floor. You roll your bag directly onto it without lifting. The weight displays. You discover the problem, if there is one, before the queue, before the desk, before the social pressure, with space and time to solve it privately. The floor-level scale does not change what the information is. It changes when and where you receive it. Japan understands that the delivery point of information is as important as the information itself, and engineers both with equal care. The scale is a small thing. The principle it represents applies to almost every friction point in any organized system. The chocolate bar that became a map of a country. Japan produces over 300 regional and limited edition Kit Kat varieties, many exclusive to specific prefectures and available only through local shops and train station kiosks. Wasabi in Shizuoka, Hokkaido melon with cream cheese, matcha in Kyoto, purple sweet potato in Okinawa. The name Kit Kat sounds close to Kitokatsu. You will surely win, making it a culturally embedded examination gift. Nestlé Japan developed this in partnership with regional governments and local ingredient suppliers, converting a standardized global product into a hyper-local collectible functioning simultaneously as gift, souvenir, and regional cultural artifact. Travelers now route through specific prefectures to find varieties unavailable anywhere else. The product became a tourism driver. A commodity chocolate bar became a detailed map of Japan's regional identity, with each prefecture represented by flavor. Japan took a globally uniform product and made it express local specificity so precisely that people travel to find the right one. That is not marketing. That is a fundamental rethinking of what a chocolate bar is allowed to do. The tiny apartment that makes larger ones feel unfinished. Tokyo's housing density has produced residential units of 15 to 25 square meters, where every decision is load-bearing. Every wall serves a function. Every surface carries storage. Beds fold into walls. Fixtures are sized precisely to the space, rather than adapted from standard dimensions that assume more room. Nothing is approximate. Nothing is wasted. The result consistently surprises people encountering these spaces for the first time. A well-designed Tokyo micro-apartment often feels more functional than a Western apartment twice its size, because the larger apartment contains loosely purposed zones and dead square footage, while the micro-apartment cannot afford either. Constraint produced precision. The design intelligence that emerges from extreme space limitation, multi-function furniture, vertical storage, modular organization is transferable regardless of floor area. Japan generates it out of necessity. The rest of the world borrows it because it works even when the necessity is removed. Japan was forced into the best version of residential design by a real estate market that left no alternative. The capsule toy machine that contains actual art. Gachapon, Japan's capsule vending machines, are understood internationally as novelty toy dispensers for children. This understanding is approximately 30 years out of date. Insert a coin, turn a handle, receive a plastic capsule. That is still the mechanism. What the capsule contains has become something else entirely. Japanese manufacturers, including Bandai and Kyoto, now produce capsule series with the material quality of display collectibles. Anatomically detailed marine biology models. 1 to 12 scale miniature foods with individual textures rendered in resin. Fully articulated figures small enough to rest on a fingertip. Artists collaborate with manufacturers on limited series that sell out within hours. Secondary markets develop around rare capsule series. Collectors plan travel routes around machine locations. Japan decided that a low price point, a randomized outcome, and a miniature scale were interesting creative constraints rather than limiting ones, and asked a serious question. What do you make when it must be beautiful, fit in a capsule, and cost under $5? Japan has answered that question tens of thousands of times. The answers are frequently extraordinary. The stamp that lets you build your own calendar. Japanese stationery culture produced the connecting calendar stamp set, a series of self-inking stamps producing individual date components, day blocks, month headers, and time grids that interlock on paper to construct a custom planning layout from scratch. No pre-printed planner, no rigid template. You stamp the structure the specific week or project requires, and plan within what you built. Pre-printed planners impose a structure that may not fit the user's actual planning reality. Weekly grids assume a scale. Monthly layouts assume a rhythm. The stamp set allows the user to construct planning architecture from scratch at whatever scale the moment requires. Japan's stationery industry consistently treats every small friction in physical desk work as a legitimate design problem. The connecting stamp extends that principle to the container of planning itself, not just what tools are used within a plan, but what shape the plan should take. Most productivity tools give you a structure and tell you to adapt. Japan made a tool that adapts to you. The private space. Hiding inside every Japanese city, the Japanese manga cafe, Manga Kisa, is a private pod facility found across urban Japan. For an hourly fee, you access a small, enclosed personal booth with a reclining chair, computer, internet, and access to thousands of manga volumes. Shower facilities, a drink bar, light food, and blankets are included. You can stay an hour. You can stay 12. They are used by commuters who missed the last train, remote workers needing private space, travelers between flights, and people experiencing housing insecurity for whom a conventional room is financially out of reach. The Manga Cafe is a formal, affordable, dignified short-term private space in cities where hotel rooms are expensive and public space is relentlessly shared. Japan created a commercial product that incidentally functions as a social infrastructure layer, providing warmth, shelter, privacy, rest, and connectivity to anyone who needs it, on a pay-per-hour basis, accessible in every major urban area, with no bureaucratic process required to enter. It is a business that quietly does something much larger than being a business. The ice cream that eliminated the part where it falls apart. Traditional ice cream has a built-in flaw. Melting ruins the experience. Cones collapse, bars drip, cups need spoons and surrender to heat. Japan's squeezable ice cream pouch fixes only that problem. The sealed tube lets you push ice cream upward at your own pace. No dripping, no mess, no structural failure. You can pause and continue without consequence. It works in any weather. The ice cream itself hasn't changed. The container has. Japan often improves things this way, not by reinventing them, but by identifying the one part that doesn't work perfectly and redesigning just that piece. The family you can hire for any occasion. Companies like Family Romance employ actors who can be hired as family, friends, or partners. Clients rent a father for events, a companion for gatherings, or a stand-in relative when someone is gone. Actors prepare in advance and stay in character, sometimes across years of repeat engagements. These aren't extreme cases, but ordinary people navigating absence, loss, or distance. Japan identified an emotional gap and treated it as a service need. Whether it feels practical or unsettling depends on perspective, but the system persists because it works, providing presence where life has left space empty. The smoking room that satisfied both sides. Debates on indoor smoking usually split between allowing it or banning it. Japan engineered a third option. In airports, offices, and malls, designated smoking rooms are sealed, negatively pressured spaces with advanced filtration. Air flows inward, preventing smoke from escaping when doors open. Smokers use the space freely. Non-smokers nearby experience nothing. It's not a compromise where both sides lose something. It's a solution where both needs are met. Japan approached the conflict as an engineering problem, not a policy choice. Instead of picking a side, it redesigned the environment so opposing preferences could coexist without interference. The mascot that generates $1 billion for a single prefecture. Across Japan, nearly every public body has a mascot, known as a Yuruchara. These characters range from charming to delightfully odd, yet they serve a clear purpose. Kumamon alone generates massive revenue through licensing, while Funashi turned a quiet suburb into a national name. They're simple designs, but highly effective. By giving institutions a recognizable face, Japan makes even bureaucratic systems feel approachable. It's not complex technology, it's identity design. Japan treats everyday interactions, even with government or agriculture, as experiences worth shaping. Sometimes, a drawing is enough to change how people connect with a place. The building that moves less than the ground beneath it. Japan sits on multiple tectonic plates, making earthquakes inevitable. Its most advanced defense isn't visible in the structure, but hidden beneath it. Base isolation systems use layered rubber and lead bearings between a building and the ground. When earthquakes strike, the ground moves while the building above experiences far less motion. Hospitals rely on this to stay functional during disasters. Decades of real-world testing have refined the technology, making Japan a global leader. Most people inside these buildings never notice the difference. The safety isn't obvious. It works quietly beneath them, reducing force, protecting structure, and keeping critical spaces operational when they are needed most. The building that disappears underground and holds 204 bicycles. Everything here shares one idea: questioning the ordinary. In Japan, the answer is often no. It doesn't have to work that way. Problems aren't adjusted. They're redefined. The eco-cycle captures this perfectly. You roll your bike onto a small panel, tap a card, and it disappears underground into a compact automated system. Seconds later, it returns only to you. No clutter, no theft, no compromise. The street stays clear because the problem no longer exists on the surface. Japan doesn't manage inefficiency. It removes it, often invisibly, and restores space back to people. And those are Japanese ideas so crazy they feel too good to be true. Every single one of these started with someone asking a question that most people don't ask. Why does this still work the way it did 30 years ago? And instead of accepting the answer, because it does, they changed it. That question, asked persistently across every system that touches everyday life, is the entire explanation. Japan didn't get here by accident. It got here by refusing to leave things unfinished. Subscribe. We'll keep finding the things that shouldn't be possible, but already are. See you in the next one.